Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Kitab Club. Today, I will be in conversation with Mansi Shah, the author of our October read, which was Saving Face. To give you guys a little bit about what Saving Face is about, let me read the back. People love a rags to riches story, but hate a woman who lied to get ahead. Amisha is on the brink of life changing success. Her skincare empire, Amla, is set for acquisition by a Fortune 500 company, and she has just been nominated for the Global Changemakers Award, the most revered entrepreneurial honor. There's just one problem: she's a complete and utter fraud. 20 years ago in Singapore, abandoned orphan Monica Joseph made a decision to steal her wealthy classmate's identity and move halfway around the world to build her life on someone else's name. For 20 years, she's managed to hide in plain sight until an ambitious fledgling journalist sets out to write the inaugural full length profile on her. With her carefully constructed persona and life's work now in jeopardy, Monica is left with no other choice. She must return to the scene of the crime and the one place she vowed never to revisit: home. So, excited to talk about this book and excited to talk to Mansi Shah about everything related to writing and reading. So, let's get started. A little intro on Mansi. Born in Toronto to Indian immigrants, Mansi Shah is the author of Saving Face, A Good Indian Girl, The Taste of Ginger, and The Direction of the Wind, which center on Gujarati characters and speak to generational differences across the Indian diaspora. Now based in Los Angeles, Mansi left her longtime career as an entertainment attorney in Hollywood to travel the world and write full time. She loves to cook, and food often plays a prominent role in her books. Hi, Mansi. Welcome to Kitab Club.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. I read this, I was reading this in so many different locations all over Boston, and I just was missing Los Angeles, but also Singapore. I lived in Los Angeles for a couple years for my undergrad, and I also go to Singapore very often because I have family there. And so
Sure.
it was really nice to read about these locations, but
Yeah.
also like things that I never knew kind of about it. Like I haven't heard of Gate of Hope or CHIJ before and any of
Yeah,
these things, but like I immediately added them to my list for next time I go visit Singapore.
for
So
sure. Yeah.
yeah.
When you go to, I was the same as you. I also have relatives from there and friends who grew up there.
Mhm.
Um, but I didn't know about the Gate of Hope until 2022. And it was such an inspiring moment to learn about it
Mhm.
that I really, no, I recommend to anyone, whether you've read the book or not, go to the Gate of Hope, but also like, before I knew there was the Gate of Hope, it's a very trendy restaurant and bar area. That's what it's called Chimes now, CHIJMES. So play on the history in terms of the name. But I had had dinner there, and then was just walking, with a local friend afterward, and she showed it to me, and I thought, this is wild that the place that I just had dinner is
Mhm.
this holy grounds that was in the center of Singapore for 150 years.
Yeah, and it's so rich in history because
Yeah,
of that.
yeah,
And yeah, you touched upon like a little bit of the history, like a little aspect of the history in this book so well. And
yeah,
obviously that has a lot to do with like the research you did and the
yeah.
conversations you had with the people there. And I do want to talk more about that, but starting off, I do want to mention that I this is the second book that I've read by you, and I read A Good Indian Girl over the
Yeah.
summer when I was
Okay.
in Italy. I think we spoke about it a
Oh
little
yes, that's
bit.
right. You were in Italy.
Yeah, so I was in Italy and I was like, this is the perfect time to read it, like fully
Right.
immerse myself in the story as well as the city that I was in. And
Yeah.
so
Not
because
just the city, the very beach club.
yes, the very beach club. Like I was
Yeah.
reading that chapter and I happened to be in the beach club.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting moment.
Yeah.
But um and so like after reading that, because I had such a great experience with it, I was very excited for this book. Like I was like waiting for it to come out so I could get it and so I could read it and stuff. And like especially also like definitely because of that, but also because it's set in two cities that, I have a lot of history with, and also the premise. Like
Yeah.
premise just sounds so good. And I know you mentioned in like your author's note that it came to you kind of while
Yeah.
you were standing there, and it was like
Yeah.
one of those moments that authors talk about so often, that just moment like a fully fledged story just comes to you.
Yeah.
And I do want to talk about that and how Saving Face came to be for you, and also your writing journey as a whole, because you started off work with as an entertainment lawyer, right? Attorney,
Yep. Yeah.
and the move to writing,
Yeah. Very
how
different.
that has been. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so I had for this book for Saving Face, and to be fair, this is the only time that's happened to me so far that I was, as I mentioned before, I had dinner at this place. It was great, had a wonderful meal. A friend who lived there said, "Hey, I want to show you something," and then we just walked around the corner from where we had dinner because it's a big. Once you go there, you'll see it's a city block. Um, and so we walked around the corner and she showed me the gate of hope. And so there's a gray gate symbol, like where the gate actually was. And there's just a placard there. And I just stood there and I read the placard about how baby girls for the most part were abandoned at this gate for, over 150 years, just given the culture. Singapore, as you know, is predominantly Chinese descent, and then there's, large Malay and Indian populations as well. But all of those cultures at, various points in history have, girls have been disfavored. And so that to me it was just heartbreaking to think about the fact that thousands, and I mean thousands, of baby girls over the course of the history of the convent and the Holy Infant Jesus, which is it's a real history. This was a real place. I played with the timeline a little bit to make the narrative work, which I explained in the author's note. But so I was standing there and I thought, it's wild to me that I don't know about this. Like, it wasn't my first trip to Singapore. I didn't know anything about it. And so, of course, I'm very jet lagged. So I'm up all night. And so I got on my computer and I was researching, thinking, oh, there must be so much information about this. This must have been written about a lot. I couldn't find really anything about it beyond what I read on the plaque. And so I found one very, very small website by a local person who had, I think, about 2 paragraphs devoted to the history of this, because I thought, wow, someone must have already written about this. And I couldn't find anything and no one had. And so then, as writers, we go down the rabbit hole of research. And so then I was like really deep down it because I was raised Hindu. I am not Catholic. I do not know much about this entire setting that I was now going to have a character be raised in. And so it just, I don't know, while I was standing there, as I wrote in the author's note, it really just came to me fully formed that there would be a woman who was abandoned there at the Gate of Hope and went on to make something of herself and had to lie about it, because Singapore, as you know, is a very classist society. America's very much based on a racial hierarchy, but Singapore, the races are very integrated in a way that I think is absolutely fascinating. When I talk to relatives about quotas for housing and jobs and things like that, to make sure the right percentages of Malay, Indian, and Chinese are integrated, it's written into their laws. So that part to me was very, very fascinating, but it just kind of went to the human nature of humans will always find a way to categorize one another, whether it's money, whether it's skin color, whether it's something else. It's just that I was a psychology major before I was a writer and before I was a lawyer. So those things are super interesting to me. And then you asked about, so I was an entertainment lawyer for about 20 years. That was very much my career, immigrant upbringing in America. Writing was something I always wanted to do. From the age of 9, I remember that's the first time I said I wanted to be a writer. And the age of 12 was the first time I said I wanted to be a lawyer. And so it's not that I switched and didn't want to be a writer anymore. I just, I had a very immigrant experience growing up. Money was not always, there for us, but it wasn't always financially stable. And so I knew by the age of 12 that I wanted to be financially stable. And, as a little girl, writing creative careers were not that. And so, I went into law. I worked, I had great jobs. I worked at major studios like NBC Universal and Warner Brothers. And, and I really enjoyed my teams. I enjoyed my work, but writing was always kind of in the background, as that was the 9-year-old girl's passion. And so I got my first book deal while I was still working as a lawyer. I was at Warner Brothers at the time. And I was very fortunate that that book did really well. And
Mhm.
so I had another book coming out that, as writers, we often know things are happening with our book before we can announce them. And so I knew something very good was happening with the second book.
Mhm.
And I knew it was poised to also do well.
Mhm.
And so I kind of sat and said to myself, okay, you can keep going. It was at that point, it was becoming very difficult to both write and work full time as a lawyer. And
Mhm.
so for me, I basically said, now is the time for you to bet on yourself if you're going to do it. And of course, I had worked for a long time. I had the financial means in order to take that leap because 9-year-old me and 12-year-old me were correct. Writing is not as lucrative as being a lawyer.
Mhm.
So I feel like everything sort of happens for a reason. And that was my path. And, I tried to become a writer much earlier than I could, but it took me over a decade to get my first book deal
Mhm.
from after I wrote the draft. So I do think all of that timing happened as it should have, even though doesn't feel like that when you're going through it.
Definitely. I related so much to a lot of the things you said because it was similar for me where it was like 9-year-old me's passion was to write
Yeah.
and then 12-year-old was like, no, I need financial stability. Like at that age,
Yeah.
like as I think this is also just like an experience as a minority group, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
where that becomes like such a big aspect of it, and you find out from such a young age how
Yeah.
important that is. And so then I went into med school route, and
Yeah.
I did that. I went to undergrad as
Yeah.
biology. I got, I was applying for MCATs and like gonna go to
Yeah.
med school and all of that. And then that itch is always there. Like the
It's
writing,
there.
it doesn't go away. It's just always
Yeah.
at the back of your head. And so
Yeah.
now I am doing that. I'm betting on myself and doing the masters. So
Well, and that's fantastic. And we need more stories. Like you have a very fascinating history of places you've lived
yeah.
and things you've done. And I will be the first one to buy that book whenever it's available. You just let me know.
Yes, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
That's so, yeah. So going off of that, you have a lot of like all your books are so ingrained in travel and also cooking, which are your other passions. I'm wondering how those started in the sense of like how do you integrate those in your books, and also for the first, because you said the first few books, the first book at least was like 10 years in the making and like it took a
Yeah.
while for it to get published. So
Yeah.
was it more that like you based off of previous travel, or like the travels that you do end up now becoming with the mindset that like I'm doing this for research, I'm like going and you know making sure that I have enough information to write about a book set in this setting, kind of.
Yeah, no, and you're exactly right. Travel is each of my novels has taken place primarily in a different country. And I'm going to keep that up for as long as I can. Because part of the mission for me too is I as a human being, I travel a lot. And I felt like all the stories based on Indian characters either took place in India or took place in America or maybe the UK. And part of my mission, because it's a second career for me, so it's very mission driven. If I were living a money driven life, I'd be doing what I used to do. And so there has to be like a philosophical change. And so for me, part of it is to show that Indian people can be everywhere. Books set in Europe can feature Indian people or Chinese people or whoever, like it can be different, or South America or Africa, whatever it is. It's just that we're a very global society and people move, and that's been my life. And so it's been a big thing for me to make sure that I'm having, because representation comes in so many forms. And so, yes, there's racial, there's gender, but there's also lifestyle representation to me. And so that is traveling, that is, women choosing maybe not to have children or not to get married or to write. The other theme that's very consistent in my stories is that they're about women who are growing and choosing themselves, but they're not really focused on women seeking. They're not romance novels. They're not focused on that particular relationship. They're focused on the other relationships in women's lives. But my first two novels got written in the decade. The first drafts, the many drafts, got written in the decade in which I did not have a book deal. And so by the time I had a book deal, I had two completed manuscripts that were ready to go. And so for those, I have spent a ton of time in France. It's the country I've visited the most, just for pleasure. India is the place I've spent the most time. That's not a place I've technically lived, but France is the place I went every year for at least once a year for decades. And so, because I lived in London in my mid-20s, and so it would be hard to not call me a Francophile at this point. But so I knew I could write authentically about it, and I kept going back there. And so so during the time I was writing, I was able to incorporate new aspects so that it would be very authentic to someone who lives in Paris. That book takes place in Paris. And I also have friends who born and raised, so I always rely on those. The lawyer side of me needs to be very authentic and very factually accurate. Like you can take me out of the legal career, but you can't take the lawyer outside of me. And so that's a big thing for me to focus on. And then now the travel is a little bit calculated, right? Because now I know I'm doing that. So when I go, so the Singapore idea for Saving Face, that came to me very mistakenly. So I was on a month-long trip in Asia, and I was spending most of that time in Sri Lanka and a week of that time in the Maldives. And so I thought I was going to set a book in Sri Lanka because Sri Lanka and India have like a really fascinating relationship with one another. So the only reason I was in Singapore is because I flew Singapore Airlines. And so if I had a layover, I said, okay, on this trip, let me see my relatives, let me see the friends. And so I was only there for 3 days. And so I had this idea on the first night that I arrived in Singapore. So then I spent the next month going to all these different places where I planned to write a book and then trying to find a better idea. And this story, Monica's story, just kept wanting to be told. And I did. I threw the Maldives in here because I really love the Maldives. But obviously there's no Sri Lanka in here. And I have an idea for Sri Lanka, but this was the one that felt like it was like bubbled to the surface and it just wouldn't go away. And so it's not to say I won't write a Sri Lanka book one day. I do hope that I will, but this kind of came to me that way. And so now like I went on a trip to Antarctica earlier this year. It was my 7th continent. I've hit them all now. And that type of trip, I knew you can't keep going back to Antarctica the way you keep going back to France. And so in my mind for a few years, I've had a book idea because not that a lot of books take place in Antarctica at all, but certainly none with brown people that I'm aware of. So I knew for that trip, I had to be very intentional about documenting and noticing things because I know as a writer, the ideas will change from what you think it's going to be in the beginning. And so I was pretty meticulous on that trip. Like I was going to enjoy myself. Obviously, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, but knowing that if I wanted to write a book that had anything to do with Antarctica, I had to be very intentional. And then same thing as the Singapore Saving Face idea happened to me just now. I was in Europe for a month and I spent a good amount of that time, the majority of that time in Sicily, Sardinia, and Austria, which were 3 places I had never been. And I thought, oh, I might get a book idea in Austria because I've already, as you know, Good Indian Girl already takes place in Italy. And, I was like, let's see if we can find something new. And so, I was in Austria and I was kind of, I'm always kind of looking around like what makes sense for this place. And then I stopped in Zurich on the way back because I flew Swiss Air back and wanted to see friends that I hadn't seen in a couple years. And I got an idea in the most unexpected place in Zurich that now just keeps coming to the surface. So I don't know. Apparently my book ideas might be based on which airline I'm flying and which city I end up in as a result of it.
That's so interesting. That
Yeah.
is so are you, I don't know if you can share, but are you working on the Antarctica book right now or the
I'm not working on that one yet. So I have, because everything is so travel focused,
uh-huh.
I kind of have a list, an ongoing list, and I like to let ideas marinate in my mind. So what I'm working on now is a book idea from something that happened in 2022.
Okay.
So I'm working on that, but then the Antarctica stuff marinates. The idea that I got in Zurich will marinate, and they'll probably go in the order in which I experienced the
Yeah.
things. So I do think Antarctica will probably be up, you know, one or two books after the one I'm currently working on. But I'm excited for it. But I think as things for me as things marinate, they get clearer. They get more focused. But I can't like I feel like the writer gets very excited. Like I came back from Europe so excited about that idea, and the research for that is going to be so much fun. And so I want to delve down the rabbit hole, but I had to
Mhm.
tell myself no. You let the idea sit there. You work on the thing that is completed. Like in your mind is completed, and the research is done, and you go work on that, and then this can hang out until you're ready.
I feel like that's such a thing that I think most writers probably face. I'm definitely facing that right now where I'm working on a bunch of different short stories. And so anytime I finish like planning and like I've let it sit in my head and I
Yeah.
know what I'm going to write, as soon as it comes time to start writing it, another idea will pop in for a different story. And
Yeah.
it always is so enticing to just drop this one and start the
Yes.
new exciting one. So
Yes.
yeah, it's interesting. I feel like that's like an exercise in just like keep trying to work on the actual one that you're working on.
Right.
And yeah, so those kind of things are very interesting. And also what you said about, I mean, I love the fact that all your books are set in different countries and
Thank
different
you.
cities and all of those things. It's so, and like you said, like it's the lawyer in you
Yeah.
wanting to make it authentic and wanting to, be true to the city and the place and the
Yeah.
story itself. And I think you do a very good job of that because it just feels so rich and so like reading it, like it makes me feel like you were there. Like
Yes.
like I feel like I was there with Ami throughout it and
Yeah.
with Monica, I will say.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's just very well done, I think, in terms of that. And I think also what you were saying, like showing like there needs to be like the philosophical mission driven aspect
Yeah.
of it now, and I think that also is so true because a lot of what you see in the real world is South Asian women, Indian women everywhere. Like it's
Yeah.
not just in the UK and Canada,
Yeah.
America and India. It's
Yeah.
you see them in places you wouldn't think you would see them.
Right.
And though I think that aspect of it and that the diasporic aspect of it, but also
Yeah.
like in a way, it feels like you're kind of tackling like the where are you from question in a way,
Yes.
in like a fun way. And I think that's an interesting thing to also think about while reading your books. So
Yeah. No,
I love
thank you. I enjoy that aspect when I'm a reader. So
that.
I knew that was going to be part of my writing.
Yeah, I think you do a great job of that. So, in terms of writing, so you mentioned that you have like a list that you go through with your ideas and you let it marinate. What is like your writing process in terms of like, do you have any rituals? Do you write every day or in like short bursts? Is there a time you prefer to write? Do you need like a beverage or something? What is your writing process like?
Yeah, no, so it's funny because there's two different processes and they're very, very different. So if I'm at home where I am now, I am I'm very like set in sort of a routine in that, I wake up. I mean, now I don't have a corporate job. So
Mhm.
I left that almost 3 years ago. And so now I'm a full-time writer. And so that was an interesting transition for someone just to come out of a corporate environment. But that's a whole different conversation. But I'm a morning person. So I wake up early, I do whatever that day's workout is, and I try to hit my writing word. If I'm writing something fresh, like I am now, like, first draft of something, My daily goal is 2,000 words a day, in general. And so, but I'm also not rigid. Like, I'm a big tennis fan. When there's a Grand Slam on, I'm probably gonna write for 2 weeks. So I'm not, I'm realistic, but I'm also flexible. So, and I don't have, I like writing at this desk that you see me at. I have tons of plants, natural light. Like, I'm what I describe as a happy writer. Like, I think there are people that need to, like, moodiness impacts their creativity. For me, it's like, no stress, no drama, calm. Like, that's when I do my best writing. And so, I generally am able to hit that word count by noon. It usually only takes me a couple hours because I now outline. So I don't, plotters and pantsers. I am a plotter. And so I know what's happening. I know I have a scene by scene outline. That's the part of the writing process that's honestly the hardest for me, is to plot and put together that outline. The writing part comes pretty naturally and easily to me, especially once I have that set in, which again, that kind of goes to my legal background. Like, I know what I'm writing. The lawyer job is also predominantly writing.
Mhm.
But so then I have lunch, and then my afternoons are usually spent on, other writer related jobs that are not the writing, unless if I'm in super creative flow, I consider that like extra credit, like bonus writing that I did that day. But otherwise it's, interviews, answering questions, responding to reader emails, social media, all that stuff happens in the afternoon. And so that's when I'm home. And because I travel a lot and a lot of writing happens when you travel, I have written on planes, trains, ferries, hotel balconies, uncomfortable chairs, waiting at whatever location. So that's not my preference, but sometimes it happens. Like a couple years ago for A Good Indian Girl, I switched publishers, and my agent and I thought we were not going to get notes for a certain amount of time. And so I went to Europe thinking, oh, that's great. When I get back, I'll have the notes, I'll do everything. The notes came in on the second day of my Europe trip, and they wanted it before I returned to America in order to meet the publication timeline. So that changed the focus of my entire trip. So I was now in these places, and I had to do this work. And so, once it's a new publisher, it's like a new boss, you're gonna meet whatever the deadline is. And so I did, but yeah, so it really depends. If I am overseas, it is wherever, whenever. If I am at home, I love having everything done by noon.
That is very interesting. So, one thing you mentioned was that you're now a plotter, but
Yeah.
you weren't before. Why and what made you want to start outlining? Was there like a difference you felt in your writing from that as well?
Oh yes, for sure.
Yeah.
So, and then there's very successful pantsers out there. So that I think there's no wrong answer. It's just who you are.
Mhm.
So because I was a corporate lawyer for such a long time, I had this notion that my creative career was going to be this very airy fairy sort of thing. I liked the idea because because I was still working as a lawyer at that time. So very, regimented. And I thought, oh, when I'm writing, it's going to be, I love this. The characters are going to tell me what they're going to do. Like, that sounds very romantic and very beautiful. And so I tried to, my first book, The Taste of Ginger, I tried that. And the reality is, I am a lawyer. Of course I'm going to be a plotter. Like, I was never going to be a successful pantser. Like, why I thought I could be is, whatever psychosis was going on in my brain at that time. But so there was so much revision in that book. I mean, honestly, it needed the 10 years in order to like keep getting revised. And I was taking writing classes and stuff like that at the same time, but it was honestly like polishing a turd. Like, I'm very proud of where it got to, but it is almost unrecognizable. My first 1 to 3 drafts and what is published, like, it's almost unrecognizable. And so then with the characters are the same, the concepts are the same, but the words on the page, the scenes, they all moved. And so then with my second one, I thought, because I could see, I was like, well, this is a highly inefficient process. And, the lawyer side of me loves efficiency. And so with my second book, I said, well, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to write out like the 10 major things that need to happen. And so I'm going to have that framework. Here's the 10 major things. So I know what I'm working toward. I know the ending. I knew the ending of that book always from page one. Whereas with The Taste of Ginger, I let it come to me initially and no. And so then when I got to A Good Indian, like I was like, oh, this is cleaner. I like this process more. When I got to A Good Indian Girl, I didn't have drafts sitting that I've been working on for 10 years. And the publishing cadence is they want you to put out a book a year. And so you got to figure out how to do that and be efficient if you're going to write full time and want to keep that cadence. And so with A Good Indian Girl, that's the first time I did a scene by scene outline. And I thought, wow, the writing process is so much more fun when there's no writer's block, there's nothing, because it is there. Every single scene is there. Like the hard part is doing that outline. And then with Saving Face, same thing. I've now implemented the rule because we get very excited when we have an idea. I am not allowed to start writing the creative part until the outline is done. And so that could take 2 months. And so, you're like that kid who wants to eat the candy bar like right away. But no, that is the rule that's implemented now. There is a scene by scene outline. Sometimes the scenes change as you're going, but not by a lot. I try to do all the thinking about the plot, structure, the ending, the motivations, the arc, everything before I write a single word.
Okay. That is how I try to do it as well. So it
Yeah.
is interesting to hear the
Yeah.
experience of pantser and then moving to plotter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that it helps alleviate or like remove a lot of the writer's block that might come if you don't plan. Were there any specific moments of writer's block for Saving Face and or like scenes that you felt were really difficult and you had to like rework them a couple times to get them right and stuff?
Yeah. So Saving Face, I love this book, but it was a labor, because, so I will never say I know how to write a book because what I've learned now 4 books in is the process changes every time. So because A Good Indian Girl was so smooth, I thought I know how to write a book. And so with Saving Face, it poured out of me so fast. I wrote the first and maybe even second draft of this in 2 months. I had an outline, I knew where I was going. But even then, it would not normally take me 2 months, it would take longer. And so I thought, this is the best thing I've ever written. It's going to come back. They're going to have practically no changes. This book was revised the most heavily. The one where I thought I knew how to write a book, and it was revised for the better. But I was so after the first round of development edits, you send it off to your editors, it comes back, and I thought, oh God, it's gonna be so much praise, and it was nice, but they basically had me change. I probably had to rewrite at least 50% of it, probably more, because the suggestion they made is they changed who my antagonist was. And so think about how that impacts every single sentence if your antagonist is different than who I wrote it as. And so when that came back, I knew how much work was ahead of me. I had intense panic. And they also had me add the prologue, which I love. And they had me change the first chapter. For me, it started in the Maldives. It no longer does, as you know. And I really loved that scene, but it is on the cutting room floor. So I think this was definitely the hardest revision I have ever done. If I'm being honest, my first 3 were kind of rubber stamped. There were, kind of minimal changes. This was a rewrite, a full rewrite. And it is better for it. But I think that was definitely the most daunting part of this process when I realized you were going to have to rewrite every single sentence. All the characters are there. We just shifted who the antagonist is. And then we had to shift other things. They added other things that were good. My original draft had most of it in Singapore. Now it's split 50-50 between Singapore and LA. So if you can just, as a writer, you can imagine the amount of work that went into that and the number of scenes that were cut and new things were added. But yeah, it's better for it, but it is the hardest novel writing job I've ever had.
Yeah, I can imagine just in also generally, I feel like editing anything just is so much harder when you love the piece that you started out
Yeah.
with. And then on top of that, it's like such a big plot change as well.
Yes.
I'm wondering, is it possible for you to share who the original antagonist was?
Yeah, I had it as the journalist.
Oh.
Yeah. So because I think for your book club, people will have read, so this won't be shocking to them. But so the text messages and all that, none of that was in my draft. So there was no prologue. The text messages weren't there. So in my original draft, which started in the present day, the reader did not learn until I think a quarter of the way in that Ami in LA is not who she said she was. And so that was part of my plot twist was now the reader is saying to themselves, hey, this woman might not be who she said she is. But with the new prologue added, you know that before
Yeah.
page one.
Mm-hmm.
Or you really should. It's not hiding the ball.
Yeah.
And so that changed. There's no mystery of who is she. You know she's pretending to be someone, you already know who.
Mm-hmm.
So that stuff all unfolded later in the book in my original draft. And it was Naira who did the uncovering of all of that. But there wasn't this more like the anonymous, someone is out to get her,
Mm-hmm.
expose her sort of thing in that way. There was a lot more of subtle subtext of is the journalist helping or not helping? And again, all the same characters were there, and I think better antagonist. And when they said that, I thought, why didn't I think of that? That is clearly better, and it would have saved me a lot of time if I had thought of that. But I think that's the beauty of having a really, really good editor. It was a lot of work for my editor this time around compared to a good Indian girl, but I think the story is so much better for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like as soon as you said like that it was Monica and that we as readers don't find out until the middle of the book that
Yeah.
Ami is not
Yeah.
Ami, she's Monica, I immediately was thinking like how interesting that would be as a movie. And I
Yeah.
know that's like your like entertainment lawyer
Yeah.
aspect, like you were like,
Yeah.
is that something that happens like when you're writing your books? Like, are you picturing them visually like movies because of
I
your previous career?
Yeah, well, because of my previous career, and I've always been a very visual person.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of everything in those terms, even from when I was little. Like I wouldn't necessarily remember someone's name, but I will always remember their face. And that's kind of always been the way that I operated. And so yeah, no, definitely. Look, it's going to be my dream to see if one of these gets adapted, and I'm on the other side of one of those contracts, the creative side of one of those contracts that I did, more than I could count on behalf of studios. But yeah, I think I do think of everything that way, both because of my career and just because of who I am as a visual person. I think that would be very, very cool to see.
Yeah, definitely. So, since we talked about how, like, the difficult aspects of writing and, like, making this book become what it is,
Yeah.
what were some of your favorite scenes to write? For me, I will say that reading the scene where Monica is giving that speech at the award
Yeah.
ceremony
Yeah.
was so powerful. And, like,
Yeah.
I can imagine it being really fun to write, but also being really excruciating with trying to get it exactly
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering what your favorite scene was, but also, yeah, that scene, how it was writing it.
Yeah, no, I also love that scene. It was cathartic to write that scene.
Yeah.
Because look, there's all of my books, they're entertaining, they're stories, you're following characters, but my hope is there's also a larger societal message that's coming through as well. Just based on these characters' lived experience, with like mine, like yours, like the other readers, members of your club. I mean, we all have experiences that inform who we are. And I think that she says all the things that so many of us wish we could say in various situations and never can. And that's kind of the beauty of fiction, right? We get to live the lives that we're not actually living. And the beauty of being writers of fiction, we really get to live those lives and pretend, for whatever amount of time that we are someone who could do that.
Mhm.
So I think, yes, I love that scene. It was hard to write because you had to you have to build to what is essentially a monologue like that, like through the pages leading up to it, because it's always a dance between. It's still a novel. It still has to be entertaining. It's not an essay on society and culture. It is a novel, and so you have to be able to weave that in and make it true to the story. And so you're really building up to her being someone who can give that speech without it looking like you're being too preachy. um, and I do. And look, you're not going to please everyone. Plenty of people read this and say it's preachy. All right. You're not going to please everyone.
Mhm.
But I also feel like what was fun for me, because this is the most like entrepreneur business focused of any of my books. And so it was also really fun writing the board members also in a cathartic way, because we have met all of those guys and and they are caricatures of a lot of people in that space,
Mhm.
and they were fun to think up, they were fun
Mhm.
because each one to me is a different caricature of a personality in that. So I was really trying to think, I wanted to hit each stereotypical personality that's in that world. So that was just pure joy to be able to write. And
Yeah.
I also really like the first chapter, the first like that party, that party is so LA.
Mhm.
um, and and so I feel like you're just immediately put into that world. So, and that was, editor add-on. Um,
Mhm.
so so that one I really enjoyed as well.
Yeah, that is, yeah. I feel like so many of the things that you mentioned were also just like, I'm wondering what the relation is between like scenes that the writer loves to write versus the ones that readers love to read, because all the ones that you mentioned were the ones that were most fun to read for me as well. So yeah, I feel like there's like definitely a connection there
Oh,
too.
good.
Yeah.
Good.
But a fun question now. If there was a song that you would use to describe Saving Face and all the other books, Indian Girl and Taste of Ginger and stuff, what would they be, the songs?
Okay, this was such a good question. In any of my interviews, no one has ever asked me this. And so this is the one I thought about the most.
Okay.
And I really, at first I thought, oh my God, how am I going to come up with this? And then it was so fun. So thank you for asking it. For Saving Face, my answer is Human by Christina Perry. Talking about the weight of the world and stuff like that, expectations. For A Good Indian Girl, my answer is Who Says, Selena Gomez. Like be who you want to be. Who says you can't do whatever it is you want to do?
Yeah.
For The Direction of the Wind, it's Finding Me Again by Lynn He. Because that's a very that's my most emotional story. Like have a box of tissues nearby if anyone's reading that one. And then for The Taste of Ginger, it is Home by Daughtry, because that's all about what is home.
Mhm.
And I actually like I listened to Daughtry a lot when I was writing or revising that one. I don't listen to music at all anymore.
Mhm.
It distracts me. But again, back in my airy fairy, the characters will talk to me. I'll listen to music. I'll do all this stuff. I listen to because like Daughtry just had that sort of slow, melodic note that I could still write through. But now it's got to be silent.
That makes a lot of sense. I have heard of home
Yeah.
and no, not home. Human. I have
Oh,
heard
human. Yeah.
yes. So I do think that makes perfect sense for this.
Yeah.
What was the one you said for a good girl, a good Indian girl?
Who says Selena Gomez?
That also, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely can see the connection between. And thank you for the warning when I read
Yeah.
direct find
Yes. Yes.
things nearby
Yeah.
and also try to see where the songs come in
Yes.
that.
Yes. I'll be curious. I mean, that book came out before this song, but since you're asking me the question now, I get to use the whole universe of songs.
Love that. Okay. So now that you have so many books out in the world and more coming, at least three that we've talked about already in this
Yeah.
conversation, is there any advice you would give to writers of diverse backgrounds?
Oh my gosh, I feel like we could have a whole thing about that. Yeah, so four books out in the world. I feel like the thing I would say, and this is something that matters to me a great deal. And for any writers of color who are aspiring or wherever they are in their journey, my door is always open if anyone has further questions. But it's hard. It's hard and it's a different type of hard from majority white authors that you will come up against. And your path will be different. And there's very little that can be done about that, but the stories matter. And I feel like we are living in a time where authentic stories are getting more of a push, but they're never going to get the same push as majority authors. They're just not. And there might be one or two minority authors who make it past it, but for the most part, for most of us, it is, and it's explaining in the editing process if someone suggests something that culturally doesn't make sense, or like for my first novel, The Taste of Ginger, there is a gay character who that book takes place predominantly in India. There is a gay Indian character and who had lived in Australia for some amount of time and is not out to his family and things like that. And so one of the I had an editor who suggested, well, maybe for him to have he has a very tragic storyline, and she had suggested, well, what if he goes back to Australia so he can live free? And I had said, that's not really the point of this book. Like, he's choosing familial love, like filial piety, and he's making that choice. And a lot of people in India do make that choice. And so I can't write a book that the subtext of that, even if it's not written that way, the subtext of that is West is best. And I'm not comfortable writing that storyline. Fortunately, I've always had good editors who, once I explained that, said, fine. And I get it. His storyline is tragic and people don't, you want to see, he's a great character. He's so lovable. You want to see him have his happy ending. And so, I'd said, part of what I'm writing is happiness means different things. It's not just the Western view of happiness. He's choosing this, and that's okay too. um, so I think it's that. It's cover art on every book. It's, most of the people designing your covers are not going to be of your culture. There are a lot of stereotypes that get put into the cover of books that are written by diverse authors. And then, once you get your book deal, it's kind of the start of the slog. I hate to say, it's like you think it's hard enough for people of color to get past the gatekeepers. Once you get past, it's like there's just more and more gates. And so you really just have to advocate for yourself at every stage in the process. Like, getting the book deal, it doesn't end. If anything, it gets a little harder. But then the marketing, and you have to have a great agent who's going to fight for you on things like marketing and things like that, because the reality is probably going to get short shifted. And you need to have, like, I use my business background a lot on my own to figure out how I can promote these books, because I'm not one of the lead titles that are chosen each quarter by a publisher, and so a lot of that falls to me. And I'm grateful to have that business background, but I think that also helps to be able to market yourself, because the reality is, if no one sees your book, you're not getting another deal, and you didn't really accomplish your goal. Like, you wanted to write, but you wanted people to read your story. And so that's almost as important as writing the story itself.
Yeah, that is such good advice. Like I I was hearing all of that and like taking it to heart. And thank you so much for that. Also, I will immediately be getting Taste of Ginger now that you have
Yeah. Yeah.
really gotten
Yeah.
me with that
Yeah.
storyline.
Yeah.
Um, that sounds fantastic. I am so excited to read it.
Yeah.
Also, I'll keep tissues for that, I feel like, since it's
Yeah. 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 I think most of my books you could shed a tear.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, like me, I'm sure there are many, many other people who saw themselves in your novels and in the characters that you have portrayed in them, whether it's Divya, whether it's Monica, whether it's Ami,
Yeah.
there's so many different characters, also like a lot of female relationships that you discuss in your books. Like even in A Good Indian Girl, we have the main character and her friend who's
Yeah.
in Italy, like the dynamics of that, and then the sisters of the main
Yeah.
character and her mother, and like so many different characters that I feel like the differences, but also the similarities that they have, and like so I'm sure there are so many people who could relate to these characters. And so I wanted to ask if you have anything that you want to say to the readers who felt seen and represented in your books.
Well, first of all, thank you for everything you just said. Honestly, that is why I write. That is why I made the career shift. I'm older than you. I grew up loving reading, but I was 41 years old the first time I read a book by a Gujarati American author that I did not write myself.
Mhm.
You really like pause to think about that. That is wild. To go 40 plus years and never really see yourself. And I remember exactly where I was. Of course, I was abroad. I was in Mexico. And it was it was such a intense feeling for me. At that point, I already had my first book deal. I can't remember if Taste Dinner was out already or not. I think maybe it was coming out. But I just remember reading that book by someone I didn't know, who had a Gujarati background, and thinking, oh, my family does some of these things. Because I grew up, we left Canada when I was fairly young, grew up in mostly white parts of the US. And so I wasn't around a lot of Indians. And so for me, reading that book, I thought, oh, maybe my parents aren't weird individually. Maybe Gujaratis are weird because other people do this too, but it's like sort of making that type of connection that this might not be something that I found embarrassing as a child that's specific to my parents. It might be a cultural thing. And to not know that until my 40s, um, I think people don't understand what that does. And so that is literally the only reason I write, whether it's good, bad, or other. I mean, again, India itself is 1.4 billion people. You put in, South Asia, I don't know what the number is, but it's obviously larger. And so we're not all one thing. And so I try to come up with different types of characters throughout the books. And even within the same books, like sometimes I'm writing and I think, do I have too many Indian characters in this? Do I need to mix it up? And no, no, I don't. It's okay if all the women in the book are Indian. It's okay. And so, yeah, I really just think that is something that I did not have growing up. I'm starting to have it now, which I think is fantastic. But I also just think that I'm grateful that the generations coming up after me will have these books on the shelves that I never had.
Yeah, that's the power of seeing yourself and your identities in books is so strong. And yeah, I agree. I'm glad, like, obviously, my generation had it much easier. Like, I think I was in my teens when I read the first book that had representations where I felt I could relate. And
Yeah.
then now generations are growing up with these things, like,
Yeah.
not even, and it's just so fantastic to see. And yeah, it's just great. I'm wondering, are you able to share which country this next one is going to be set in, the one that's going to come out next?
Yeah, so I'm working on it now. It's very, very early. I'm in that dreaded outline stage. Um, so I started it before I put it down to write Saving Face because Monica was just very persistent.
Mhm.
And so that one I did actually skip the order.
Mhm.
But that one takes place in Indonesia.
Oh, that is very interesting.
Yeah.
I am so excited. I went to Indonesia earlier this year for the first
Okay.
time. Oh, well, not the first time, but to Jakarta for the first time. So I'm
Okay.
excited to see
Okay.
how that would be.
Yes.
Yeah.
That one is very, I will say that one is part of the reason that one's taking so long and I put it aside in order to write Saving Face is that one is hands down going to be my most personal novel yet. That's going to have the most of me in there. And that one is also probably going to be a tissue necessary to have the tissues for that one. But I'm excited. I'm excited to tell that story and see where it goes. But yes, I'm in the dreaded outline stage.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Also, I was wondering if you are able to share which book that was that you mentioned that was by the Gujarati American that
Oh
you.
yeah, yeah. It was Somya Dave's first book. What was it called? Um, Again, I'm visual, so I know what the cover looks like. Well-behaved Indian women.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
okay, okay. Okay.
yeah,
I need to read that. I haven't read that yet.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I feel like I'm so inspired by all these conversation topics that we've just had, but also just like your writing journey. I think it's just so interesting to see like I mean, I think about my writing and I think about, being a South Asian woman writing, and I have never like I've never put the words that this is a mission driven work that I'm
yeah,
trying to do, and it's never been that like strong of a direct like statement that I'm making, kind of
yeah,
like taking up space and like, making my stories and my experiences be heard and things. So it's just very interesting to talk about that and hear your side of it. So thank you
yeah.
so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful. You are an excellent interviewer. Great questions. I'm so excited for you to be doing your MFA, and I cannot wait to see what you write.
Thank you so, so much. Um, Once again, if you haven't read Saving Face or any of Mansi's other works, I highly recommend checking them out, buying them from local independent stores, or requesting them at your libraries. And make sure to follow the author's Instagram page. I'll link it in the description for updates and news about their upcoming work. Thank you so, so much. This
Thank you.